You fall asleep on a Skype call so your long-distance girlfriend can feel less alone. When you wake up, your phone is full of messages from her. Who is in your room? Why aren't you answering? She spent the night listening to your mouse clicking, your chair creaking, and footsteps on your floor, while your bedroom door was locked from the inside the whole time. 2 teens driving home through farm country at 1 a.m. Both see the same thing in their headlights. A tall, snow-white figure standing by the ditch, twitching in a way nothing human or animal should move. A grandmother gets a call from her daughter, hysterical, screaming, "Help! The kids!" before the line dies. Caller ID shows the exact number of the house where her granddaughter is calmly watching TV, alone. And a camping trip with close friends turns into a nightmare when they burn a cursed sculpture. And one of the gentlest guys they know suddenly snaps, attacks them in the dark, and has to be taken away by police, naked and laughing, with a hatchet in his hand. These are 15 stories people swear actually happened to them. If you like real-life horror, glitches in reality, and stories that don't have clean explanations, hit subscribe now, turn off the lights, put your headphones on, and let's get into story 1. About 4 years ago, I was living on the 3rd floor of a relatively new apartment complex. The layout of the building was a little unusual. To get to my apartment, you had to climb a flight of stairs to reach a locked door, step through it onto a patio area, and then walk across to my front door. My bedroom window faced that patio, and there was a light out there that I almost never turned on. Even with the blinds closed, the light would shine straight into my room, bathing it in harsh illumination that made it impossible to sleep if it was on. It was a summer night, warm and quiet, and I was lying in bed, drifting somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, when something stirred my senses. The first thing I noticed was that the patio light was on. I didn't remember turning it on. The glow spilled into my room in the way I'd always hated, it casting strange shadows along the walls and ceiling. My English bulldog, who usually sleeps like a rock no matter what's happening around him, immediately jumped up, stiffened, and stared at the window. Then he began to whine softly, low and urgent, the kind of sound that made my stomach tighten. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had gotten up and switched it on earlier without remembering. Maybe there was a neighbor on the patio. But then my eyes caught movement outside, and everything in the room changed. A human figure was standing on the patio, positioned directly in front of my window. It wasn't moving around, just standing there as if it was staring in, waiting. My dog, who normally would be barking at anything strange, simply sat down and cocked his head, watching it as if he recognized something but couldn't figure it out. His calm, curious posture made the scene feel even stranger. Fear hit me like ice. My hand shot for my cell phone, intending to call 911, but it was dead, drained of all power. The panic surged, but then I remembered my nightstand. I grabbed my handgun, my pulse hammering, ready to defend myself. But as I raised it, a strange thought whispered through my mind. Don't do anything yet. Just watch. Something told me that whatever this was, immediate action might not help. So I did. I just stared at the figure. For what felt like an eternity, maybe 20 seconds, I watched it standing there. The silhouette was perfectly still, and then, almost as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned on its heel and walked out of the light. No, there was no sound of the outer door opening or closing. It was as though the figure simply vanished into the darkness beyond the patio. I was frozen in place for a long moment, my dog sitting quietly beside me, still watching the window, as if expecting it to return. The next morning, I went down to the apartment complex office, and reported what I'd seen. They were polite but skeptical, and a security guard said he would check the cameras. The next day, he returned and told me that after reviewing the footage, there had been no one near my building at the time I described. I explained that the figure had been in front of my window, not outside my door, but the cameras showed nothing. I didn't see the figure again, but the experience lingered in my mind. Weeks later, a maintenance worker came into my apartment to work on the garbage disposal. I mentioned the incident to him casually, half expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he nodded seriously. "You're not the only one," he said. "It shows up sometimes. Nobody knows why, and it doesn't come back. Just don't be alarmed if it happens again." The memory of that night is still vivid. The combination of the dead phone, the figure standing silently, and my dog's calm, watchful presence left a lingering sense of unease. I can still picture the figure framed in the harsh yellow glow of the patio light, the way it seemed both ordinary and impossibly wrong. Even now, years later, walking past that window or thinking about that summer night makes the hairs on my arms stand on end. It's one of those moments that defies explanation. Cameras saw nothing, and no one entered or left. My dog's reaction was uncanny. And yet there it was, a presence, a figure, something that existed for just a few seconds, but left a lasting mark on my perception of the apartment, of safety, and of the unseen possibilities that might be lingering just beyond what we can see. Even with the rational part of my mind trying to dismiss it as a trick of shadows, a half-remembered dream, or some weird play of light and imagination, the memory refuses to fade. I remember the weight of the silence outside the window, the way the figure didn't move erratically, didn't threaten, but simply existed in the space between me and the outside world. My dog's quiet observation was even more unnerving than fear or barking. It suggested recognition, something that I couldn't comprehend, but that he seemed to understand instinctively. Living there after that night was different. I avoided the patio light entirely, leaving the room darker than I ever had before. Every shadow seemed to hold the potential for the figure to return. The air felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't explain, and even mundane sounds, the rustling of leaves, the hum of a neighbor's AC, set me on edge. I think about that night often, more than I would like to admit. There are countless logical explanations I've considered, but none of them fully satisfy me. And when I tell the story now, I can feel the same chill that washed over me in that bedroom, the same tension that made me hesitate before raising my gun, the same quiet awareness that something existed just beyond the boundaries of normal perception. It never returned, and maybe that's the most unsettling part. Something was there. It disappeared without a trace, and I have no idea why or what it might have been. And even now, years later, whenever I glance out that window or imagine the glow of the patio light at night, the memory of the silent figure standing there is impossible to shake. It lingers, a quiet reminder that sometimes the world is not as predictable as we like to believe, and that in the space between ordinary life and the unknown, something can appear without warning, leaving only a fleeting, unforgettable impression. I was 14 the night something happened that I still can't explain. And even now, when I think about it, I get the same cold feeling in my stomach that I did back then. I was home alone, which wasn't unusual. My mom had gone grocery shopping, and my brother was over at a friend's house. It was early evening, not fully dark yet, but the house had that quiet, empty feeling that only happens when you know you're the only one inside. Every little sound feels louder when you're alone like that. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock in the kitchen, the pipes clicking in the walls, I remember sitting on the couch flipping channels, not really paying attention to anything, just enjoying the silence and the freedom of having the TV to myself. The phone rang out of nowhere, loud and sharp in the quiet house. It startled me enough that I jumped. We still had a landline back then, and it was mounted on the wall in the kitchen. I walked over, expecting it to be my mom asking me to check something in the freezer or reminding me to feed the dog. When I picked up and said hello, I was met with pure panic. It was my grandma. She wasn't just worried. She was screaming. Her voice was high and shaking and desperate. She kept yelling, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What happened?" over and over again, like she couldn't hear me or like I had already told her something terrible. At first, I thought maybe she had called the wrong number. I kept saying, "Grandma, it's me. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong." But she wouldn't calm down. She was crying and asking about my mom and my brother, asking if we were safe, if we were hurt. Who's hearing her that scared made my heart start pounding. Fear spreads fast, especially when you don't know why someone is afraid. I started to feel like I was missing something important, like maybe something had happened that I didn't know about yet. I checked the windows without thinking, half expecting to see something outside. The house suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Finally, she managed to slow down enough to explain. She said my mom had just called her. According to her, my mom had been hysterical, screaming into the phone, repeating, "Help! The kids! Help the kids!" over and over. Then the line went dead. My grandma said she tried calling back immediately, but no one answered. So she called again and again until I picked up. Hearing that made my skin prickle. I told her my mom wasn't even home. She was at the grocery store. My brother wasn't there either. It was just me, sitting on the couch watching TV. There had been no screaming, no phone call, nothing. My grandma didn't believe me at first. I could hear it in her voice. She thought I was scared and lying to protect her, or that I didn't understand what was going on. She kept insisting that she heard my mum, that she would recognize her daughter's voice anywhere. I walked around the house while I talked to her, checking the doors and peeking into rooms, my imagination running wild. Every shadow suddenly looked suspicious. I kept telling her everything was normal. The doors were locked. The lights were on. No one was there. Eventually she quieted a little, but I could tell she was still terrified. A few minutes later, I heard my mom's car pull into the driveway. I've never been so relieved to hear that sound. I ran to the door before she even got her key in the lock. The moment she stepped inside, I started talking all at once, telling her about the call, about Grandma screaming, about the message she supposedly left. My mom looked confused at first, then concerned. She took the phone and called my grandma back while I stood right there listening. I could hear my grandma start crying again the second she answered. My mom kept saying, calm and steady, that she had never called. She had been in the grocery store checkout line. She even had the receipt to prove the time. There was no way she could have made that call. I watched her face while she talked, searching for any sign that she was joking or hiding something, but she looked genuinely shaken. The calm tone she used was the kind adults use when they're trying to keep someone else from panicking, even though they're scared themselves. After a few minutes, she hung up and said we were going to Grandma's house because she was too upset to stay alone. The drive over felt longer than usual. The sky was getting dark, and every street light that passed made the inside of the car flash bright and then dim again. I kept replaying my grandma's voice in my head. The fear in it was real. You can't fake that kind of fear. When we got to her house, she opened the door before we even knocked, like she'd been standing there waiting. She hugged my mom so tight, it looked like she was afraid to let go. Then she hugged me just as hard. Her hands were shaking. She took us straight to the kitchen where her phone sat on the counter. With trembling fingers, she pressed a button and pulled up the caller ID. There it was, our number, our exact home number, clear as day on the screen, logged at the time she said the call came in. seeing it made the room feel colder. My mom stared at it in silence. I remember the hum of the overhead light sounding suddenly loud again, like it had in the house earlier. No one spoke for a few seconds. There was nothing to say that made sense. My grandma swore again that it was my mom's voice. She repeated the words she heard, her own voice breaking as she did. "Help, the kids," over and over. She said it sounded like my mom was running or struggling, like something was wrong in the background. My mom kept shaking her head, insisting she had been nowhere near a phone. I believed her. I had been home the whole time. The house phone never rang except when Grandma called me. There was no outgoing call, no sign anyone had been there, and yet the proof sat glowing on that little screen. We all sat at the kitchen table after that, none of us wanting to be alone in a different room. My grandma made tea even though none of us drank it. It just sat there steaming while we tried to talk about normal things. But the conversation kept drifting back to the call. Every explanation sounded weak. A crossed line, a prank, a glitch. None of it explained how it could show our exact number or how it could sound exactly like my mom. The more we talked, the less comfortable I felt. It was like we were circling something we couldn't see, but could all feel. That night, I refused to sleep in my own room. I stayed over at my grandma's with my mom. I lay awake on the couch listening to every creak of the house, expecting the phone to ring again. Part of me was scared it would. Another part was scared it wouldn't, because the silence left too much room for my thoughts. I kept imagining some version of events where the call was a warning, a glimpse into something that almost happened but didn't. The idea was ridiculous, but at 14, your mind fills gaps with whatever scares you most. Nothing else happened. The phone didn't ring again. No disasters followed. Life went back to normal on the surface, but the memory stuck with all of us. Even years later, my grandma would bring it up sometimes in a hushed voice, like saying it too loudly might invite something back. My mom never had an explanation, neither did I. All I know is that the fear in my grandma's voice was real. So the caller ID was real, and I was standing in that quiet house the entire time the call supposedly came from it. I've replayed that evening in my head more times than I can count, trying to find the missing piece that would make it logical. I've never found it. It sits in my memory like a loose thread that refuses to be tied off. Nothing visible happened. No one was hurt. But the feeling of something being deeply wrong, of reality slipping for just a second, is what stayed with me. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and a phone rings unexpectedly, I'm 14 again, standing in that kitchen, listening to my grandma scream and wondering how a voice can come from a place it was never in. When I was younger, my family went on holiday to Turkey for a week. The trip had been exciting and full of new sights, the busy streets, the smell of spices in the markets, and the little cafes tucked down side streets. But by the end of the week, our plans shifted slightly. The hotel had asked us to move rooms for our last night. The explanation was simple. The room we had been staying in was now technically rented out to someone else. It wasn't a problem at all, just one of those small inconveniences that happen when staying at a busy hotel. We packed up the few things we had out and moved to another room at the back of the hotel. This new room was completely unused, bare, and quiet. Since we were leaving early the next morning, we didn't bother unpacking anything. The place felt empty, almost sterile, and it didn't seem like it would matter. The evening passed uneventfully. We had dinner, talked quietly in the room, and eventually went to bed, settling into the stillness of the hotel at night. A few hours later, I woke up in the dark with a strong urge to go to the toilet. But something felt off. There was a strange, sickening sensation in my stomach, the kind that feels like it's been flipped and dropped at the same time, twisting my insides and leaving me uneasy. Normally, I would have brushed it off, but my bladder was close to bursting, so I pushed through the discomfort and got out of bed. As I stepped into the corridor, that's when I saw him. A small boy stood there, in the middle of the hallway, staring at me. His clothes were old-fashioned, ragged and torn, almost as if he had walked out of a time long before ours. And he was dirty, like he had been living outside for a long time, and he wore a flat cap that shadowed his face. His presence was entirely silent, completely still, but the way he looked at me felt heavy, almost suffocating. I froze, unable to move. I've never felt so afraid in my life, the kind of fear that makes the world feel suddenly wrong, like nothing is in its proper place. My heart raced, my hands shook, and my mind could barely comprehend what I was seeing. I knew I should have gone to the bathroom, but the fear made my bladder irrelevant. I slowly backed away, sat down on the bed again, and pulled the blanket over myself as if it could offer protection. I peeked carefully from under the edge of the blanket, and to my horror, the boy had moved closer. He didn't say a word. He didn't blink. He just stood there, watching me in complete silence. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the fear was paralyzing, and I couldn't even reach for the door. The minutes dragged on like hours. Eventually, I heard movement elsewhere in the room. My mum had gotten up to go to the toilet herself. I asked her, almost desperately, if she had seen anything unusual, and when she looked confused and said no, I told her exactly what had happened. Her reaction was quiet, but serious. She later told me that she had never seen me so scared in her entire life, and that my reaction alone convinced her that I hadn't imagined it. Even though she didn't see the boy herself, she believed it had to have happened because of how terrified I was. I don't remember much else about the night after that. My mind kept replaying the boy standing in the corridor, his ragged clothes, or his flat cap, and the way he had silently moved closer without saying a word. For a 12-year-old, it was terrifying. It wasn't the kind of story that came with dramatic noises or attacks, but it felt real in a way that was impossible to ignore. The fear clung to me for hours, even after I finally fell asleep. There's also something about that hotel room that added to the unease. The apartment we stayed in for that night overlooked a single-house walled compound nearby. The place was heavily guarded, with armed security patrolling every few hours. Black cars would pull up and drop off older men in business suits who waved casually to the guards as if it was completely normal. Even though everything seemed orderly and professional on the surface, there was something about the entire scene that felt slightly off. The combination of the unfamiliar security measures and the strange architecture made the area feel tense and unsettling, like the kind of place where ordinary rules didn't entirely apply. Looking back now, the memory of that night has stayed with me. The boy in the corridor was brief and inexplicable, but the fear was profound. It wasn't just a fleeting thought or a half-remembered dream. It was a real, physical reaction that made my stomach twist, my heart race, and my hands shake. I've never forgotten it. Even years later, whenever I think about being 12, alone in a foreign hotel room with the dark stretching down a long corridor, I can still see him in my mind. Small, ragged, silent, and watching, as if he had stepped out of another time entirely. It's strange how some memories stay with you. This one is small, or almost ordinary in terms of the context. A hotel, a new room, a child waking in the night. But it carries a weight that nothing else from that trip did. The boy never spoke, never moved aggressively, but the presence alone was enough to make a 12-year-old feel the world was wrong. There's no way to explain what I saw. There was no one else in the hotel hallway, no trick of light, and no warning from anyone that something unusual was about to happen. It was just a moment, a brief glimpse into something that didn't belong, and it left an imprint that has lasted decades. Even now, thinking about that night, the combination of the boy, the corridor, and the strange compound outside the window creates a feeling that's hard to shake. It's the type of fear that doesn't need sound or movement to exist. It's quiet, but it lodges itself in your memory, replaying itself whenever you recall it. For a 12-year-old, it was enough to make sleep impossible for a long time, and for an adult looking back, it's still chilling. That night taught me that fear doesn't always come with clear threats. Sometimes it comes quietly from something inexplicable that just exists in your line of sight, watching, waiting, and making the world feel just a little off balance. Back in high school, a group of us had this routine where we'd always end up hanging out at one friend's house way out near farmland, close to Amish country. His place felt like the edge of the world compared to where the rest of us lived. Once you left the main road, the streetlights disappeared. The air got darker and everything felt wider and emptier. We'd stay there late almost every time, talking, playing games, wasting hours the way you do when you're a teenager, and sleep doesn't seem important. Because he lived so far out, the drives home were always long and quiet. Most nights I didn't mind it. I actually liked those late drives. The roads were empty, the fields stretched out on both sides, and the only light came from my headlights and the occasional distant farmhouse window. It felt like the whole world had shut down except for the car. One night around 1 a.m., I was driving one of my friends home after we'd all split up. He was sitting in the passenger seat, half turned toward me, talking about random life stuff. Nothing serious, just the kind of rambling conversation you fall into when you're tired but not ready for the night to end. The road we were on rolled up and down in long hills, and I remember cresting one and seeing nothing ahead except darkness and the pale stretch of pavement. As we went down the next hill, my headlights reached farther out, and that's when I saw it. At the bottom, on the side of the road, the beams caught this white shape standing near the ditch. It was so bright against the dark that it almost hurt to look at. My first thought wasn't person or animal, it was just confusion. It was too big and upright to be a deer, and the color was wrong for anything I expected to see out there. It looked as white as fresh snow, glowing in that harsh headlight light. In the few seconds it stayed in view, it moved. Not walking, not turning its head. It twitched. That's the only word that fits. A strange, jerky motion that didn't look natural. The shape was humanish, with a tall outline, but the proportions felt off in a way I can't clearly describe now. My brain kept trying to label it as a person in light clothing, but something about the way it held itself didn't match. As the car sped closer and then past, my entire focus locked onto it. The conversation in the car died instantly. My friend stopped mid-sentence like someone had cut the audio. Neither of us said a word while we passed. I watched it in the side mirror for a split second, but the darkness swallowed it as soon as the headlights moved on. The silence inside the car felt heavy. I could hear the engine, the tires on the road, my own breathing. A few seconds went by before I finally asked, without looking at him, "Did you see that?" There was a pause, and then he said yes. What scared me more than the figure was his answer. This was a guy who hated anything supernatural. He rolled his eyes at ghost stories, creepy videos, all of it. He was the first person to explain why something weird had a normal cause. Hearing him confirm he saw the same thing made my stomach drop. He didn't laugh. He didn't try to joke it away. He just sounded unsettled. We didn't describe it to each other in detail right then. We just acknowledged it and let the conversation die. Neither of us seemed eager to keep talking about it while we were still out there on that road. The rest of the drive passed in near silence. Every shadow looked deeper. Every mailbox and fence post made my pulse jump. I kept checking the mirrors without meaning to, half expecting to see that white shape running behind the car or standing in the road again. Nothing else happened. The night stayed quiet and empty. I dropped him off, watched him hurry to his door, and then drove home alone with the radio off. The darkness felt thicker than usual. When I finally got into bed, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bright outline at the bottom of the hill and that strange, twitching movement. My brain kept trying to rationalize it. A person in reflective clothing, a weird scarecrow, a plastic bag caught on something. But none of the explanations sat right with the memory. The image stayed sharp in a way most old memories don't. Even now I can picture the exact stretch of road and the way the headlights hit it. What sticks with me most is that shared moment of silence. That instant where both of us recognized we'd seen something we couldn't immediately explain. If it had just been me, I could have blamed my eyes or my imagination. Having him see it too locked it in as something real, whatever it was. We've talked about it a few times over the years. Neither of us has a solid answer. The details blur a little more every time we try to describe it, but the feeling comes back immediately. That cold, confused jolt when the familiar night landscape suddenly held something that didn't belong there. I don't jump straight to supernatural conclusions. There was probably a normal explanation waiting somewhere we never found. But the memory never softened into something harmless. It stayed strange. It stayed bright and out of place, like that white figure at the bottom of the hill. And even now, when I drive late on empty country roads, there's a small part of me that scans the edges of the headlights, half expecting to see it standing there again, twitching in the dark. When I think back on some of the strange moments from my life, this one still stands out sharply. I was driving with my mum, just the two of us, the kind of ordinary drive you'd expect to take for granted. She was behind the wheel, and I was sitting in the passenger seat, the quiet hum of the engine filling the small space of the car. We were going on a familiar route, the kind she took every single day without thinking about it. The turns were second nature, the stoplights memorized. But this time, she missed a turn she made almost every day of her life without fail. Missing it threw us off. We had to take a different route, one that was longer, winding through a quieter road with fewer cars and less traffic. At first I didn't think much of it, just a small inconvenience. But as we drove, a sudden thought passed through my mind. I said, almost half joking, maybe we would have crashed if we took that road. The words barely left my mouth when something happened that I can't explain to this day. It was like the world shifted in a way I didn't fully understand. I felt myself lift out of my body, like my consciousness was being pulled upward and away. I could see myself sitting there in the car, my mom's hands on the wheel, the road stretching ahead. It lasted only a few seconds, but those few seconds felt infinitely long. I watched as though I was floating above the car, looking down at the ordinary scene with an eerie, impossible clarity. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, I was back in my own body. The sensation faded, leaving my mind reeling and my heart pounding in a way that didn't match the normal rhythm of driving. Even now I can't explain it. It wasn't a dream, not really, because I was aware of my surroundings the entire time. The feel of the seat, the sound of the tires on the asphalt, the light filtering through the car windows. Yet, at the same moment, I was somewhere else, like I had been given a brief glimpse into another reality. It felt like confirmation, a strange, visceral signal that something bad would have happened if we'd taken the turn my mum had missed. The memory of that floating, out-of-body moment has stayed with me for years, a puzzle I can't solve, and a warning that felt almost alive. That experience made me think back to my younger brother. Even when he was 2 or 3, there were moments that made me question reality in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. My brother had this strange knack, or so it seemed, for seeing things before they happened. It was subtle at first, little things that could easily be dismissed, but over time the instances grew harder to ignore. I remember one specific moment clearly. He was sitting on my mum's lap in the driver's seat, just a toddler with his tiny legs dangling and his hands pressed against her arms. Everything seemed normal until he suddenly started crying, full force, and wouldn't stop no matter what she did. He was insistent, wailing and pulling at her until she obeyed and took the next exit, one she hadn't planned on. At the time, she didn't understand why he was behaving this way, and honestly, neither did I. But then, as she glanced in the rear-view mirror, she saw it. The cars directly in front of her, the ones she would have followed if she hadn't taken the exit, were caught in a massive pile-up. The memory of that day is vivid in my mind, even now. The sense of shock, the disbelief, and the relief that came after it, all of it is burned into my memory. I don't think anyone who wasn't there could really understand how intense it was. My brother had no idea what he was doing, no conscious understanding of what he had just prevented. He was just a toddler, responding instinctively to something that he could not yet articulate, something that felt like an internal warning. There was another time too, though the details blur a bit with memory. He threw a tantrum, loud and desperate, to stop my dad from going on a call. My dad later told me that the call nearly cost one of his friends his life. My brother's crying, his insistence, had changed the course of events in a way that seemed impossible for someone so small to influence, and it wasn't something we could explain rationally, and it wasn't something my brother likes to talk about now. He remembers the feelings, but doesn't want to dwell on them, doesn't want to face the idea that he might have had some sort of premonition as a child. Looking back, these moments all connect in a way that's hard to describe. My own brief, out-of-body experience in the car, combined with the strange instincts my brother displayed, leaves me with a lingering sense that there are things in this world we can't measure or predict, things that operate outside the logic we rely on every day. It's not supernatural in the way movies or stories describe. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it leaves a mark. A feeling that reality is a little wider than what our eyes and minds can usually perceive. Even as an adult, I think about these events with a mixture of awe and unease. Driving with my mom that day, feeling that sudden pull of consciousness, made me question how fragile life is and how small moments, a missed turn, a toddler's cry, can change everything. It's a reminder that not everything can be explained, and that sometimes the universe, or whatever force guides it, gives you signals you aren't ready to fully understand. I've tried to rationalize it, to ground it in science or coincidence. Maybe my brother was unusually sensitive, or maybe I was just extremely alert at the wrong moment. But the clarity of that floating sensation in the car, the precise timing, and the uncanny accuracy of my brother's instincts as a toddler make it hard to dismiss. There's a feeling there, a strange mix of fear and wonder, and that lingers in my chest every time I think about it. Even now, when I drive familiar roads or think about the tiny decisions that can alter outcomes, I can't shake the memory. Life feels thinner somehow, like it's stretched across invisible threads that we don't usually notice. And sometimes, in the quiet, I wonder about those threads and how they guide us without our knowledge, nudging us away from danger and toward the paths we were meant to take, even if we can't see the reasons until later. These experiences, my floating moment, my brother's premonitions, aren't just stories I tell to sound strange. They're moments that made me pause, that made me realize how little control we truly have, and how many mysteries exist right alongside our daily lives. They left me with a mixture of respect, fear, and a quiet gratitude for small interventions that might otherwise go unnoticed. It's the kind of thing that changes how you see ordinary days, ordinary drives, ordinary moments, because they remind you that something unseen can intervene in ways that save lives, sometimes without anyone understanding why. Even years later, I think about them often. I think about that car ride, the brief sensation of being lifted out of my own body, and I think about my brother as a toddler, crying with such urgency that he altered fate without understanding it. And when I do, there's a quiet awe that comes with it, a recognition that the world is stranger and more fragile than I ever imagined. That day, that moment, that childlike instinct, they all combine to remind me that life is full of narrow escapes, small miracles, and mysteries that don't always come with explanations. It's a lesson I carry with me every time I drive, every time I watch my family, and every time I consider how easily a day can shift from ordinary to life-changing in an instant. There's a delicate, invisible balance holding all of us together, and for reasons I'll never fully understand, we sometimes catch glimpses of it just before it changes everything. Four years ago, I went through something that still feels unreal when I think about it. It's the kind of memory that doesn't fade with time. If anything, it's gotten sharper. I call it the incident because I still don't have a better word for it. It sounds dramatic, but I almost died that night, and everything about it felt like it was pulled straight out of a nightmare. Back then, I had a close male friend I'd known for years. I'll call him Sam. He was one of my best friends, someone I trusted completely. We'd been through a lot together, and I had never once been afraid of him, not even a little. One day, we decided we wanted to go camping. It wasn't planned very far in advance. It was one of those spontaneous ideas that sounded fun in the moment. Since I was going to be alone in the woods with a guy, even though I trusted him, I invited another friend, Rita, to come along. More people always make camping better anyway. We packed up the car and headed out toward a campsite I hadn't visited in a couple of years. I didn't remember the exact route, but I knew the general direction. The drive was peaceful at first. We were laughing, listening to music, excited to get out of town for a night. Right before the last tiny town on the way, we stopped at a gas station to double-check directions. The attendant pointed down the road and casually said, "Follow the storm." We looked where he pointed and saw massive black clouds stacked on top of each other in the distance. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the most terrifying storm I'd ever seen. The clouds looked alive. Lightning flashed inside them like something was trapped and trying to get out. For a minute we sat in the car debating whether we should just go home. Any sane person probably would have. But we liked camping in storms. Rain, thunder, wind. It usually made things more exciting, not less. So we told ourselves we were being dramatic and kept driving. The dirt road leading to the campsite cut through thick forest. As we got deeper in, the sky darkened until it felt like evening even though it wasn't. That's when I started feeling it. A horrible, crawling dread settled into my chest. It wasn't anxiety or nerves. It was a deep certainty that something bad was about to happen. I didn't have a reason. Nothing had happened yet. But the feeling was so strong it made my stomach hurt. Lightning started striking close to the car, not far away, right outside. The thunder hit instantly after each flash. The storm felt focused on that stretch of forest, like we had driven directly into its center. Finally, we admitted it was too dangerous and turned around. The second we left the forest and hit the open road, the storm vanished. The sky behind us was still black, but ahead of us it was clear. It was like crossing an invisible line. We decided not to risk that area again and headed toward a reservoir closer to town. It had a man-made lake and scattered campsites. When we parked, there was another couple camping right near the trail entrance. We chatted with them for a bit. They seemed friendly, relaxed, just normal people out enjoying the night. We invited them to come find us later after we set up so we could drink and play games together. We hiked along the lake trail and found a private spot. While we were setting up camp, I randomly got a text message from an artist friend. That alone was strange because reception out there was terrible. She'd been getting more successful with her art and had a personality that matched: chaotic, creative, unpredictable. I told her where we were, and she replied that she'd been looking for a big fire and was on her way. The message was weird, but she was weird, so I didn't question it. Time skipped ahead in the way good nights do. The other couple joined us. We were drinking, laughing, telling stories. My artist friend showed up carrying this ugly, heavy statue. It was twisted and abstract, the kind of art that makes you uncomfortable without knowing why. She said she made it her freshman year of college, and that it had brought her terrible luck ever since. She wanted to burn it and get rid of whatever curse it carried. If I had felt even a hint of warning, I might have said no. But I don't believe in cursed objects. I didn't then, and a part of me still fights the idea now. We laughed, tossed it into the fire, and watched it crack and blacken in the flames. It smelled awful as it burned, like melting plastic and something sour underneath. We joked that we were freeing her from bad luck and kept drinking. After a couple hours, my artist friend and Sam were smoking weed together. He was also drinking heavily. Rita and I didn't smoke. The night grew darker, and the couple headed back to their camp. It was just the four of us again. That's when Sam started acting strange. At first it was subtle. His voice changed. It dropped into this low, rough tone that didn't sound like him. We laughed it off. Crossfaded, we said. Too much weed, too much liquor. And then he started muttering to himself. The words were jumbled and dark. He pulled Rita aside and told her he worked for the CIA, that he had offshore accounts with millions of dollars, that he could make any of us disappear without consequences. Even then, we thought it was drunk nonsense. We teased him about it. Around that time, we realized Rita's hatchet was missing. We had been using it for firewood. We searched with flashlights, but the woods were too dark. We assumed we'd find it in the morning. Sam sat alone across the fire, whispering to himself, staring into the flames like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. Eventually, he passed out. Rita and I stayed up talking, laughing about how weird he'd been. We thought it was over. Just a wild camping story to tell later. About an hour after that, rain started falling. The same storm we'd avoided was rolling in again. We decided to go to the tent before it hit hard. We shook Sam awake and told him it was time to sleep. He could barely stand. We each grabbed an arm and dragged him toward the tent. We stopped to unzip it. That's when everything broke. Sam exploded into motion. A scream tore out of him, high and inhuman, a sound I still hear in nightmares. He swung wildly and hit Rita hard enough to throw her across the campsite. He spun toward the fire and kicked the coals apart, killing the last light. The world went pitch black. No moon. Storm clouds covered everything. Suddenly, he was in front of me. I could feel his breath. Then I was on the ground. The impact knocked the air out of me. Before I could recover, he was sitting on my stomach, hands locked around my throat. He squeezed with terrifying strength. His arms were so long I couldn't reach his chest to push him off. I clawed at his wrists, bucked my hips, scraped my nails against his skin, but he didn't loosen his grip. I could hear Rita screaming my name somewhere in the dark. My vision narrowed into a tunnel. The edges turned black. It felt endless, but it was probably only minutes. Through the blur, I saw Rita attacking him, punching, fighting like her life depended on it. When I finally went limp, she thought he had killed me. She later told me something snapped in her. She started kneeing him in the face, over and over until he lost focus. He let go. She shoved him aside and dragged my unconscious body away. When I woke up, she was pulling me down the trail. She was crying but trying to stay quiet. The fear in her voice cut through my fog instantly. I woke fully and panicked. I was hysterical, sobbing, shaking, unable to breathe right. She kept whispering for me to be quiet, that he hadn't followed us. I realized I was barefoot. My flip-flops were gone. The trail was sharp rock and gravel slicing into my feet. Rita stopped, took off her sandals, and forced them onto me. She walked barefoot without hesitation. I'll never forget that. That girl saved my life more than once that night. We stumbled toward the parking lot. It felt like miles. Every second I expected to hear him crashing through the trees behind us. When we reached the other couple's campsite, we screamed for help. The man came out with a gun, ready to go confront Sam. Now his girlfriend convinced him that getting us to call the police was smarter than starting a shootout in the woods. We spotted the camp manager's cabin nearby and ran to it. A couple answered. We collapsed inside, sobbing out the story. The woman gave us water while her husband called 911. I remember staring at their door and counting 5 deadbolts. I fixated on them. Nothing was getting through that door. Police and an ambulance arrived about 30 minutes later. The officers went to the campsite armed. Before the ambulance doors closed, one officer told us they found Sam. He was naked, bleeding from the fight, holding the missing hatchet and laughing. He was rambling about being possessed. Total nonsense. They asked about drugs. We said weed and alcohol. That was it. The hospital part is a blur of lights, paperwork, and drugs. And they scanned my neck to check for swelling. They wanted to keep me overnight. I refused. I needed to go home to my cat, my comfort, something normal. When I got home, I realized I had locked my bedroom door earlier with my keys still at the campsite. My cat was trapped inside. I sat outside the door listening to him cry while I sobbed. I was too medicated to function. Rita and her mother went back to retrieve all my belongings. None of us had slept in over 24 hours. After that came charges, court, statements, therapy, and a long stretch of fear that clung to everything. He pled guilty. When the judge asked if he wanted to speak, he said nothing. No apology, no explanation, just silence. I still don't believe in most supernatural things, but I cannot shake the certainty that burning that statue changed something. Sam was never violent before, not once. Something snapped in a way that didn't feel human. Maybe it was a mental break. Maybe drugs triggered something hidden. Maybe trauma found a doorway that night. I know there are logical explanations. I've heard them all. But when I close my eyes, I don't see logic. I see firelight reflecting off a twisted statue. I hear that scream. I feel his hands around my throat. Sometimes there is no neat ending, no closure, just survival and the long echo of a night that refuses to fade. I carry it with me quietly, and every time I tell the story, it feels like opening a door I usually keep locked tight. This happened just a few days after my family started moving into a new place. The house still felt unfamiliar, like it hadn't decided whether it accepted us yet. Every sound stood out. The walls creaked, the floors popped, and every little noise felt louder than it probably was. I'd been away at college most of the time, so I didn't even have a good sense of my parents' or my sister's routines yet. I kept assuming I was hearing people moving around when the house was actually just settling. Last Monday, I was outside cutting up a pile of sticks stacked against the side of the garage. It was one of those chores you do mostly on autopilot. The air was windy, the kind that pushes at your clothes and hums in your ears. About 10 feet away from me, there was a side door that led directly into the garage. I hadn't used that door at all that day. I'd gone in and out through the big garage door, so that side door wasn't even on my mind. At one point, I looked up from what I was doing and saw the door standing open, not wide open, just cracked to maybe a 60-degree angle. It took my brain a second to register it because I didn't remember seeing it open earlier. I was still processing that when it started to move. The door began to swing shut. At first it was slow, almost gentle, like someone easing it closed. Then it picked up speed. The motion turned sharp and final, and it slammed shut hard enough that I heard the impact over the wind. The sound echoed inside the garage. I froze for a second with the hatchet still in my hand. My first thought was the wind. It was strong enough that day to move loose things around, and an open door catching a gust isn't exactly supernatural. But the other possibility hit me right after. Someone had been inside the garage. We still had boxes stacked everywhere. Tools, random belongings, stuff we hadn't sorted yet. The idea that someone might have slipped in to poke around made my stomach tighten. I pictured someone standing just out of sight, listening to me chop sticks and waiting for a chance to grab something. Without really thinking it through, I picked up the hatchet properly and walked into the garage, trying to look a lot braver than I felt. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I expected to see something overturned, a shadow moving, any sign that I wasn't alone in there. There was nothing. Every box looked the same. Nothing was out of place. The air inside the garage felt still and dusty, untouched. I stepped over to the interior door that led into the house and opened it. My dog was standing there, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. If there had been a stranger running through the house, he would have been barking his head off. Instead, he just looked confused by the sight of me holding a hatchet like I was preparing for a showdown. The house itself was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no doors closing upstairs. It all looked completely normal. That's when I started to feel a little embarrassed. I told myself the obvious explanation was the wind. Old house, strong gust, mystery solved. Still, the image of that door moving on its own stuck in my head. I wanted proof. I didn't want to walk away with that crawling feeling that I'd missed something important. So I decided to recreate it. Getting to the door from inside the garage meant climbing over a few stacks of boxes. It was awkward, but manageable. When I finally reached it and put my hand on the knob, I immediately felt something was off. The door didn't feel loose or light, it felt solid. I tried turning the knob. It didn't move, not even a little. It was locked tight. I put more pressure on it, thinking maybe it was just stiff. Nothing. The knob wouldn't rotate a single centimeter. I stared at it, confused. Wind can shove a door, sure, but it can't unlock one, and it definitely can't turn a knob. I gave the door a hard tug anyway. It didn't budge. I leaned back and pulled with my full weight. The door stayed exactly where it was, like it was part of the wall. For a second, I just stood there holding it, feeling stupid and unsettled at the same time. Then I unlocked it. I tried pushing it open without turning the knob, just to test it. Same result. It refused to move. Only when I unlocked it and turned the knob properly did the latch release. The moment the door started to open, it was obvious why I'd never seen it open before. The paint along the edges cracked with a dry snapping sound. Little chips fell to the floor. The hinges screamed in protest, a long, rusty creak that made my teeth itch. Parts of the cheap paneling on the door peeled slightly, like it had been sealed shut for months. It looked and sounded like a door that hadn't been opened since we moved in. I stood there, holding it half open, staring at the damage like it was evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. And this was not a door that had been casually swinging in the wind all afternoon. It had been stuck closed, sealed almost. When I let go, it swung shut quickly and latched with a clean click. That part felt normal, gravity and momentum, nothing weird there, but it didn't answer the real question. How did I see it open? I replayed the moment in my head over and over. The angle of the door, the slow start of the movement, the slam. It was burned into my memory with uncomfortable clarity. I know how unreliable memory can be. I know the brain fills in gaps and edits scenes. But this didn't feel fuzzy or dreamlike. It felt sharp, immediate. I stood in that garage for a long minute, listening to the wind push against the outside walls. Every gust sounded like it was trying to prove something. And the rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Maybe the latch hadn't caught earlier. Maybe pressure differences pulled it open somehow. Houses do strange things when air moves through them. But the physical evidence in front of me didn't match that neat answer. The cracked paint, the protesting hinges, the locked knob, all of it said that door had been closed for a long time. I eventually put the hatchet down and went back outside, but the chore felt different after that. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to move again. It stayed shut, solid, ordinary. Just a door. That's the part that sticks with me the most. Not that something dramatic happened afterward. No footsteps, no voices, no shadow slipping away, just a single moment that refused to line up with logic. The world snapped back to normal immediately, which somehow made it feel stranger. I can sit here and say it had to be a trick of perception, a weird angle, a reflection, my brain misfiring for half a second. That's the explanation I tell people when I talk about it, because it's the one that lets the story end cleanly. But there's a quieter part of me that still sees that door hanging open in the wind, starting to swing shut on its own. And that part doesn't have a tidy answer. It just replays the image over and over like a clip that refuses to fade, reminding me how thin the line can feel between the explainable and the things that sit just outside it. My house has always felt strange at night. Even when I was a kid, I noticed it before anyone else seemed to. There was something about the quiet, about the way the walls creaked and the floors settled, that made my skin crawl. I remember sitting at my computer for hours, my back to the window, feeling this creeping sensation that someone was watching me. It wasn't constant, but it was there often enough that I started noticing it without even thinking about it. Sometimes it would start with a small noise, the computer chair creaking as if someone had shifted in it when no one was around. Other times, I'd notice a cabinet left open that I was sure I'd shut. I tried to reason it out in my head, blaming drafts or forgetting, but the feeling never quite left. Every time I sat down at my desk, I would glance behind me, or half expecting to see a shadow or a figure I knew wasn't there. When I got that room remodeled, things only got weirder. We added a door leading directly to the backyard, which was meant to make the room more useful, but it had the opposite effect on me. That door became another focal point for everything strange in the house. At night, I would hear small taps coming from it. They weren't loud or violent, but just enough to startle me. I would pause whatever I was doing and listen, but whenever I went to check, there would be nothing. I convinced myself that it was probably just branches hitting the door in the wind, or perhaps a bird that had landed on the patio roof. Still, the tapping would keep coming, sometimes irregular, sometimes in a rhythm that made my heart pound a little faster. It was during a summer storm that things took a much darker turn. The rain was pouring down so hard, it felt like the sky itself was pressing on the house. Thunder rolled continuously, and lightning lit up the yard in blinding flashes. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on homework, when there came a tremendous thump against the backyard door. It wasn't one of the usual little taps. This was heavier, louder, deliberate. My heart jumped into my throat, and I froze for a moment. The rain hammered against the windows, making it impossible to see anything outside. I couldn't tell if it was the wind, a tree branch or someone, or something, standing there. I rushed toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears, but the rain was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. The yard looked like a wall of water and shadow. The next morning, I went outside to check the ground, and that's when it got even stranger. The grass in front of the door was completely flattened and ground up as if someone had been stomping on it. The blades were bent in every direction, the dirt churned beneath them. I knew my dog hadn't done it. He was small and wouldn't have been able to leave marks like that. There were no footprints either, nothing that suggested a person had been out there in the rain. The yard was eerily empty, and yet it was obvious that something heavy had been there. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the storm had pooled water in just the right way to flatten the grass, or maybe some animal had trampled through it. But even imagining a creature big enough to do that, I couldn't make the scenario fit. That wasn't the only unsettling thing in the room. Sometimes I would see flashes of light coming through my blinds. At first, I assumed it was cars passing on the street or reflections from neighbors' windows. I tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. Eventually, I started folding the blinds differently, angling them so that the flashes couldn't reach me. That seemed to help, and the light stopped, but the unease didn't. Even when nothing happened, I still felt watched, still felt that low-level tension sitting behind my ribs, like the room itself had an awareness I couldn't explain. I began noticing little things during the day too. Objects slightly moved from where I'd left them, things I was sure I hadn't touched. My dog would sometimes stare at empty corners of the room, growling softly. I'd feel my stomach tighten. There were moments where I would pause mid-step because it felt like the air itself had changed. Heavy, almost pressing down on me, like something was moving unseen just out of reach. Sometimes I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the house settling, the wind, my imagination, or stress from school. But that rational part of my brain couldn't explain the cumulative feeling, the way I always felt unsafe when I was alone in that room, particularly at night. Even mundane things became triggers. Sitting at my desk, back to the window, my chair would creak. I knew the sound. I knew there was no one in the room, yet my body tensed instantly. My brain would scream, "Watch out," and my eyes would dart to the blinds, to the door, to every shadow. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, and sometimes I had to step away and do something else just to calm down. Nights became exercises in hyper-awareness, constantly scanning and listening for anything out of place. Sometimes it wasn't even the sounds or movements. There were nights when everything seemed perfectly quiet, yet the sensation persisted. I would sit at my desk, staring at the faint glow of my monitor, and feel that creeping, inescapable sense of being observed. It was subtle but insistent, a tension in my chest that wouldn't relax no matter what I did. I would try to rationalize it, the window, the light, the angle of my chair, but even knowing it had a possible explanation didn't make the fear go away. It had become physical, a part of how I experienced the house. Over time, I started trying small rituals to regain a sense of control. I would check the door multiple times before bed, making sure it was locked and latched. I would sweep the yard for any animals or branches that could be causing noise. I even started recording little videos of the backyard during storms, hoping to catch a logical explanation in the act. Nothing ever appeared. The door didn't move in the recordings. The yard was empty. And yet I knew what I had seen and heard. I couldn't explain it, and that was perhaps the most unsettling part. My dog's reactions didn't help calm me either. Unlike most normal situations where pets can be soothing, he sometimes reacted to things I couldn't see. He would growl at corners, stare out the windows for long minutes, or suddenly stand and run to a different part of the house as if responding to something invisible. Watching him, I realized that the tension in the room wasn't just psychological. Something about it affected him too. I could feel his unease radiate through the floor, and it made my own anxiety spike even higher. Even on sunny, calm days, the house kept its edge. The strange noises might lessen, the door might stay put. But the memory of that storm night, of the door slamming on its own, lingered. It had marked the house for me, and the mark didn't fade. I found myself tensing every time I walked past that door, every time I heard a noise behind me, every time I sat down with my back to a window. Even simple tasks, like grabbing something from a shelf, became exercises in awareness, scanning for movement, sound, or light that could signal something amiss. I've learned to live with it, but it doesn't feel normal. I sometimes lie awake at night, counting the moments until dawn, trying to convince myself that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. But deep down, I know I experienced something that didn't make sense, something that left a mark. That feeling of being watched, of hearing and seeing things that can't be explained, lingers. It's subtle, quiet, but it's always there. A reminder that sometimes our homes, the places we should feel safest, can be unpredictable, almost alive in the way they make you feel. Even now I feel tension in my chest just writing this down. The memory of that storm night, of the slamming door and the flattened grass outside, stays with me in a way that ordinary events never do. It doesn't matter if the explanation is wind, an animal, or my imagination. The experience is real, the fear is real, and that's enough. Sometimes, on walking into that room, sitting down at my desk, or opening that door, triggers a memory that floods back like it happened yesterday. I've come to realize that some experiences leave permanent impressions, and not every mystery needs an answer. Sometimes it's enough to know that something occurred, something unexplainable, something that will stay with you. Living in that house has taught me to respect uncertainty. I can't predict what the night will bring. I can't always explain what I see or hear, but I can stay alert, stay cautious, and trust my instincts. And maybe that's the closest thing to safety I'll ever feel in that room, in that house, where the ordinary and the inexplicable collide every night. If you're still here with your headphones on and the lights probably off, you're exactly who I'm making this for. Before we go into the next story, hit subscribe so you don't lose this channel in your feed, and tap like if you want more true experiences that don't have neat explanations. All right, let's get into the next one. This is one of those memories that sticks with me because it came from someone I trust completely, and I still don't have a clean explanation for it. At the time, I was in a long-distance relationship, and our schedules didn't line up well because of the time zone difference. When I was going to sleep, it was the middle of the day for her. We tried to make it feel like we were sharing space anyway, so sometimes I would leave Skype running while I slept. She liked the comfort of knowing I was there, even if I wasn't awake, and I didn't think much of it. It felt harmless, just a small routine that made the distance easier. One morning, I woke up and reached for my phone like I always did. I expected the usual good morning message or something normal. Instead, I saw a wall of texts sent in the middle of the night. They weren't casual messages. They were frantic. The first one was asking if I was okay. The next was asking who was in my room. After that, they got more panicked, telling me to answer, asking why I wasn't responding, saying she could hear someone moving around. I sat up in bed, instantly awake, my heart already beating faster. The room was quiet. Nothing was out of place. My door was still closed the way I always left it. I scrolled through the messages again, trying to make sense of the timeline. According to her, sometime while I was asleep, she started hearing rapid clicking sounds through the call. Not random noise, but distinct mouse clicks, fast and repeated, like someone was sitting at my desk using my computer. On top of that, she said she could hear my chair creaking, the exact slow, familiar sound it makes when someone leans back and shifts their weight. The thing that got to her wasn't just the noise, it was how clear it sounded. She told me later it didn't feel distant or glitchy the way audio bugs usually do. It sounded close, deliberate, like someone was right there in my room. She kept calling my name through the mic, expecting me to answer. When I didn't, she got more and more scared. She thought someone had come into my house. The weirdest part is that I'm a light sleeper. If someone even opens my door a little too fast, I wake up. My floor creaks, my chair is loud, there's no quiet way to move around in that room. If anyone had actually been there clicking my mouse and shifting in my chair, I would have woken up immediately. But I slept straight through the night. No dreams about noise, no half memories, nothing. When we talked about it later that day, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't teasing me. She looked genuinely shaken when she described it. She even recreated the sounds with her hands on the table, tapping rapidly to show how fast the clicking had been. She said she eventually muted the call because it was freaking her out too much, but she kept checking back, hoping I'd wake up and respond. When I didn't, she just sat there watching the silent call window, convinced something was wrong on my end. I checked my computer history, half expecting to see random programs open or some sign that I'd sleepwalked and used it. There was nothing unusual. No files opened, no apps launched, no weird activity. Everything looked exactly the way I left it before going to bed. The mouse was still in the same spot. The chair was pushed in the same way. The room felt untouched. Of course, there are logical possibilities. See, audio glitches happen. Connections distort. Maybe the microphone picked up some background interference and her brain shaped it into something familiar. Humans are good at turning noise into patterns, especially when we're already on edge. I've told myself that explanation 100 times. It's the most reasonable one. But what sticks with me is how specific the sounds were to her. Not just random, static or bumps, but the exact rhythm of mouse clicks and the exact groan of my chair. Those are details she recognized because she'd heard them before when we were on calls. And her fear wasn't casual. It was the kind that lingers after you've scared yourself too badly to brush it off. After that night, she asked me not to leave the call running while I slept anymore. I agreed without arguing. The comfort it gave her before was gone, replaced by this association with something unsettling. We never had another incident like it, but the memory hung around. Every once in a while it would come up in conversation, and we'd both fall quiet for a second, remembering how real it felt at the time. I still can't say what she heard. Maybe it was a harmless technical hiccup that lined up in a perfect storm of bad timing and imagination. Maybe it was just one of those moments where the brain fills in blanks and creates a story that feels solid. All I know is that I slept through the entire thing, and she sat on the other side of the world, listening to what she was sure was someone moving around in my dark room. Even now, when I think back on it, I picture my empty chair, my silent computer, and a live call carrying sounds that shouldn't have been there. It's not the kind of story with a dramatic ending or a clear answer. It's just a small, eerie question mark that never quite went away. And sometimes that's worse, because there's nothing to resolve it. It just sits there in your memory, quiet and unexplained. When I was a teenager, my parents went to a wedding and left me at home to watch over my younger brother and sisters. It wasn't unusual for them to leave us alone. We'd done it plenty of times before, but something about that evening felt different. The house had its usual quiet, the kind of stillness that makes little sounds echo too loudly, and we all felt it, even if we didn't know why. We were all sitting in front of the TV, trying to distract ourselves with a movie. I don't remember which one it was, only that the flickering light of the screen was the only thing breaking up the shadows around the room. My siblings were settled on the couch and floor, eating snacks, and for a while, everything seemed normal. We laughed at a few jokes on the screen, the kind of forced laughter that only works if everyone's pretending to be relaxed. Then something caught our attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hallway that led to my sister's room. At first, I thought it was one of my siblings playing a trick, maybe sneaking off for some reason. But then, my brother and sisters noticed it too. Two little toddlers were walking down the hallway and into my sister's room. Their steps were slow and deliberate, just like little kids do, but that didn't make any sense. We were the only ones home. We froze, our eyes locked on the hallway. None of us said a word at first, just stared in disbelief. Then, almost simultaneously, we all whispered, "Did you just see that?" Our voices were barely audible, yet filled with the same mix of fear and confusion. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. We all saw the same thing. The same tiny figures moving across the floor like they belonged there. The house felt heavier after that. Every creak of the floorboards made our hearts jump. Even the familiar sounds, the fridge humming, the faint tick of the clock, sounded different, as if amplified in the tense silence. We didn't move from our spot on the couch, didn't speak much, just watched the hallway, half expecting the toddlers to come back out, but they never did. The rest of the evening passed in a kind of frozen anxiety. The movie continued to play, but none of us paid attention. We kept glancing at the hallway, eyes wide, waiting for something to happen. Even when the lights flickered slightly from the TV, it felt like the house was holding its breath with us. My parents came home later, completely unaware of the tension that had gripped us all. That night, my sisters refused to sleep in their room. The living room became their temporary bedroom, with blankets and pillows scattered across the floor. I stayed nearby, feeling their fear and trying to make it feel safer, though I was shaken myself. I kept thinking about those little toddlers, where they came from, and why we were the only ones who saw them. Even years later, that memory sticks with me. There was no explanation, no one to ask. The house was empty, the doors locked, and yet for a brief, unexplainable moment, we weren't alone. The way it happened, the way we all saw it together, made it impossible to dismiss as imagination. It was a shared experience that none of us could fully understand, a glimpse of something beyond what we knew, and it left a mark on all of us that night. When I try to remember that night, the first thing that comes back isn't the voice. It's the feeling of being small, the kind of small you only feel when you're a kid, and the world still feels enormous and full of things you don't understand. I've gone back and forth for years about whether it was a dream or not, but what keeps bothering me is that it never had the texture of a dream. My dreams have always had a certain softness to them, like they're wrapped in fog. This memory is sharp. It has edges. I can still feel the air in the room, the shape of the bunk bed under my hands, the way my chest felt tight with fear. When I was little, my dad had a strict rule about bedtime. He and my mom watched grown-up shows after we went to sleep, and one of those shows was The X-Files. To me, that show was forbidden territory. I didn't even fully understand what it was about. All I knew was that it was scary enough that I wasn't allowed to watch it. That alone made it fascinating. Sometimes I'd lie in bed and imagine what kind of horrors must be on the screen if adults thought it was too much for kids. One night, I snuck out just enough to peek at the opening. I remember the theme music drifting down the hallway and the strange images flashing on the screen. I only watched for a few seconds before I made a noise without meaning to. My dad caught me immediately and marched me back to my room. I was already shaken from what little I saw. The music alone got under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. After that, The show became something bigger in my mind than it probably really was. It turned into this symbol of everything dark and unknown that lived just outside my bedroom door. On the night that matters, I woke up thirsty. It was one of those sudden wake-ups where your throat feels dry and you're instantly wide awake. My room was dark except for a thin strip of light under the door. I remember lying there for a moment, debating whether it was worth getting up. The house was quiet, but not peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes every tiny sound stand out. The hum of the TV down the hallway told me my dad was still up watching his show. I climbed down from my top bunk as carefully as I could. Every creak of the ladder felt louder than it should have. I didn't want to get caught wandering around, so I moved slowly, holding my breath at every little noise. When I opened my door just a crack, the light from the living room spilled into the hallway. From my angle, I could see the TV. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. Curiosity always wins when you're a kid. I stepped into the hallway and started toward the kitchen. The walk felt longer than usual. The hallway stretched out in front of me, and the flickering light from the TV made shadows jump along the walls. As I passed the living room, the show reached some kind of climax. I didn't know the characters well, but I knew enough to understand something terrible had happened. I remember seeing a woman on the screen and a man in distress. Even through my limited understanding, I could feel the tension pouring out of the scene. It hit me right in the chest. The music swelled, voices rose, and I felt a rush of fear that didn't belong to me but still grabbed hold. I froze in the hallway. My thirst vanished. All I wanted was to get away from that screen. I turned around and hurried back to my room, my heart pounding. I climbed back up to the top bunk and pulled the blanket over myself, but I couldn't calm down. The scene I'd glimpsed kept replaying in my mind. My window was directly across from my bed, and I stared at it, wide-eyed, too scared to close my eyes. The glass reflected a faint shimmer of light from outside, and every movement of the trees looked like something trying to get in. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. I lay there listening to the distant murmur of the TV and the occasional sound of the house settling. My thoughts kept circling back to what I'd seen. The idea of death, of people disappearing, of forces you couldn't fight. Those themes sank into me deeper than I understood at the time. I was a religious kid then. I believed in angels and demons as real things, not metaphors. The world felt crowded with invisible presences. That's when I heard it. The voice didn't come from the hallway. It didn't come from the window. It didn't come from anywhere I could point to. It was just there, right next to my ear, close enough that I felt the air shift. It said, clear and full of venom, Scully is dead and Mulder won't find her. The words burned into me. The voice was thick with hatred, not loud, not shouting, just certain. It sounded like something that enjoyed what it was saying. My entire body locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't even gasp. Every muscle went rigid like I'd been frozen in place. I remember my ears ringing afterward, like the silence that followed was just as loud as the voice itself. My first thought was that it was the devil. That's not an exaggeration. That's honestly what I believed in that moment. I had no framework for anything else. The voice didn't sound like my dad. It didn't sound like my brother. It didn't sound like anyone I'd ever heard. It didn't even sound human in the normal sense. It was too close, too intimate, like it had skipped the air entirely and spoken directly inside my head. But it didn't feel like a thought. It felt external. That's the part that still gets me. I lay there shaking, eyes locked on the window, terrified that if I moved even a little, I would attract attention from whatever had spoken. I listened for footsteps in the hallway. Nothing. The TV was off now. The house was completely silent. There was no way my dad could have come in without me hearing him. He was a heavy walker. The floor always gave him away. My brother would have had to climb the bunk bed ladder, and that thing sounded like a drum every time someone touched it. No one came. The room stayed still. The darkness didn't change, but I didn't feel alone anymore. The air felt crowded, like something had just stepped out of sight but was still nearby. I don't know how long I stayed awake. Fear distorts time. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, exhaustion must have dragged me under because I did fall asleep. I don't remember drifting off. I just remember waking up in the morning with sunlight in the room and the memory sitting on my chest like a weight. I didn't tell anyone right away. Part of me was afraid that saying it out loud would make it real in a different way. Another part worried they'd laugh or tell me it was just a dream. Even as a kid, I knew how that would sound. But deep down, I kept insisting to myself that I knew the difference. I knew what my dreams felt like. This didn't have that dream-like blur. It had clarity. It had intention. Years have passed, and I've tried to explain it to myself in 100 different ways. A waking dream, sleep paralysis, a fragment of the show bleeding into my imagination, a child's mind filling in gaps with fear. All of those explanations make sense on paper. None of them erase the memory of how real it felt to hear that voice pressed against my ear in the dark. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear of that night. It was the realization that the mind can produce experiences that feel indistinguishable from reality. That thought is almost scarier than the idea of something supernatural, because if your brain can do that once, what else is it capable of? How thin is the line between what happens outside you and what happens inside? Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night and stare at the window the same way I did back then. The room is different. The house is different. But the feeling is familiar. That old childhood awareness that darkness isn't empty. It's just full of things you can't see. Most nights, it fades quickly. I roll over and go back to sleep. But every once in a while, in that quiet space between waking and dreaming, I remember the voice, the hatred in it, the certainty. And for a few seconds, I'm back in that bunk bed, small and frozen, convinced that something leaned down out of the dark just to whisper in my ear and leave me changed forever. When my mom tells the story, she still gets quiet and distant, like she's reliving it every time. She was very close to one of her uncles, a man she adored, who had gone off to serve in Vietnam. I never met him, but I grew up hearing stories about how brave he was, how he always had a joke or a kind word for everyone, how his presence could fill a room. Losing him was a big blow to the family, even before she fully understood what had happened. One night, she had a dream that she remembers as vividly as if it had been a memory rather than a dream. She was standing somewhere unfamiliar, but strangely real, with a group of soldiers around her, her uncle and his squad. Everything in the dream was sharp, clear, and full of sound. Then suddenly, there was an explosion. A landmine went off, and in an instant, the soldiers, including her uncle, were gone. She remembers the feeling vividly, the terror, the helplessness, the hopelessness of knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it. It felt like the kind of thing that would stay etched in your mind forever. The next morning, she woke up feeling strange, shaken in a way she couldn't explain. There was a heaviness in the air at her parents' house. Her grandmother was crying in the kitchen, clutching a letter or a telegram. I'm not sure exactly what form it came in, but it carried the news that her uncle had died. What made it absolutely chilling was the detail, the exact circumstances she had dreamt of. A landmine, the same group of soldiers, the same loss. It was as though her mind had somehow glimpsed across time and space, a warning or a premonition that she couldn't understand. She told me that at first, she thought it must have been coincidence. Maybe someone had written or told her something that had mixed into her subconscious. But the clarity of the dream The way she could recall the explosion, the soldiers' reactions, and the timing. It didn't feel like anything she could have imagined. She remembered every sound, every flash, and every movement, and yet she had never been there. Even decades later, she says that it haunts her. It's not just the grief of losing her uncle or the sadness that came with the news. It's the memory that she somehow knew it would happen in exactly that way before anyone else did. She believes, though she can't explain it, that her dream was some kind of connection, some glimpse into something beyond the normal human understanding of time. I've always been fascinated and scared when she tells this story. To this day, I can see the mix of awe and sorrow in her eyes. She isn't prone to exaggeration, and she's not the type to make up stories about the supernatural. This experience shaped her understanding of dreams and intuition in ways I think even she can't fully articulate. It's the kind of story that leaves you questioning everything. How could she know? Was it just coincidence, or was it something beyond explanation? She never had another dream like it before or after. It was as if that single night had opened a window to a reality she wasn't meant to see, just long enough to bear witness to something she could never unsee. Even now, when she talks about it, you can feel the weight of it, how her subconscious, her heart, and some inexplicable force all aligned to give her a vision that was tragically true. It's a story I'll never forget, and I can't help but wonder if some part of all of us can reach across time in ways we just don't understand. I grew up hearing the same story over and over, told in low voices at family gatherings, usually after the adults thought the kids weren't paying attention. It was one of those stories that everyone in my family knew by heart, but no one ever told it casually. Even years later, when I was old enough to understand the details, the tone never changed. People didn't laugh while telling it. They didn't exaggerate it for fun. They told it the way you tell something that still unsettles you, even decades after it happened. My family lived near a tiny town called Crane, Indiana, close to a Navy munitions plant. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where military families rotated in and out, but the core community stayed the same. People watched out for each other's kids. If a dog barked at night, well, half the town knew about it by morning. That closeness is part of what made the story so heavy, because when something bad happened, it didn't just affect one household. It rippled through everyone. Before I was even born, when my mom was pregnant with me, a little boy in town disappeared. His name was Ronnie. He was only 3 or 4 years old, just old enough to wander, too young to understand danger. One minute he was there, and the next he wasn't. In a small town, news like that spreads instantly. People stopped what they were doing. Search parties formed without anyone having to organize them. Men walked the woods with flashlights. Women called neighbors, checked sheds, checked ditches, checked every place a child might crawl into. The entire town held its breath. Days went by, and they still couldn't find him. That's the part my family always lingered on when they told the story. The waiting, the helplessness, everyone expecting to hear good news at any moment, and instead getting silence. The woods around Crane are thick and uneven, full of hidden dips and sandy patches and old structures left behind from who knows when. People began to fear the worst, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Saying it would make it real. Around that time, there was a strange bit of local fascination with a horse that had been on television. According to the people who believed in it, the horse could answer questions. You'd lay out blocks with letters, ask something, and it would knock the blocks down to spell a response. Even retelling this part now sounds ridiculous, and I know that. My family knew it sounded ridiculous too. But desperation makes people reach for anything that offers even a sliver of hope. They decided to try. The way it was described to me, The atmosphere around that moment was tense and fragile. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was treating it like a joke. They asked the horse a simple question first. Do you know why we're here? The horse tapped out letters one by one. R-O-N-N-I-E, Ronnie. My family swore the air changed in that instant. The room went quiet in a way that wasn't just silence. It was the kind of silence where everyone is afraid to breathe in case they interrupt something important. They asked the next question carefully, like they were afraid of the answer, but needed it anyway. Is he alive or dead? The horse spelled dead. Some of the adults cried. Some refused to accept it, but they kept going, because if they had come this far, they needed to know everything. Where is he? The horse spelled a single word, sand. At the time, that didn't immediately make sense. There were patches of sandy ground scattered in the area, but nothing that stood out as obvious. Still, the search shifted. People started checking every sandy stretch they could think of, and eventually, horribly, they found him. He was lying on a patch of sand, exactly where the horse had pointed them. Whenever my grandfather entered the story, the mood in the room always changed again. He was a policeman back then, assigned to first watch over the body. I never got the details of what he saw. No one ever shared them. All I know is that after that night, he refused to talk about it for the rest of his life. Not once. Not even when people asked gently. Not even years later, when the case had long since settled into town history. My grandfather was not a dramatic man. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or chase ghost stories. If anything, he was practical to a fault. The fact that he carried that silence with him until the day he died left a deep impression on my family. It was like there was a locked door in his memory that no one was allowed to touch. 14 years passed after Ronnie's death before my grandfather himself passed away, and in all that time, the subject never reopened. The town healed in the way small towns do. Life kept moving. New families arrived. Kids grew up. But Ronnie's name stayed like a shadow in the background of conversations. Everyone knew it. No one forgot. Years after I first heard the story when I was a teenager, something happened that dragged it out of the past and into my own life in a way I never expected. I was walking through the woods with one of my brothers. We'd done that 1,000 times before. The woods were familiar, almost comforting, a place to wander and talk and escape the boredom of small-town afternoons. That day started like any other. The air was still. The ground was soft under our shoes. We were joking about something I can't even remember now. Then the feeling hit. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was a shift, like the world tilted a fraction of an inch and my body noticed before my brain did. My skin prickled. The hairs on my arms stood up. The air suddenly felt heavy, like walking into a room after an argument. I stopped without meaning to. My brother looked at me at the exact same moment. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just said, "You feel that?" Hearing him say it made my stomach drop. If it had just been me, I could have brushed it off as nerves or imagination. But the fact that he felt it too made it real in a way I couldn't explain. We stood there in silence, listening to the woods. Everything looked normal. Birds still moved in the trees, leaves rustled, but the normal sounds felt distant, like they were happening behind glass. We kept walking, slower now, every step cautious. The deeper we went, the stronger that wrongness felt. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness, like being watched by something that didn't need eyes. That's when we saw the barn. It was old, half swallowed by the woods, the wood warped and gray with age. Neither of us remembered seeing it before, and we'd explored that area plenty of times. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the light was dim and dusty, streaking through cracks in the walls. We stepped in without speaking, drawn by curiosity that fought with the urge to turn around. On the inside wall, painted in uneven letters, were words that froze me in place. Ronnie White was found near here. For a second, my brain refused to connect the sentence to the story. It was just paint on wood, just letters. Then, the meaning crashed in all at once. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe properly. My brother swore under his breath. Neither of us moved. The air inside that barn felt thick and ancient, like it had been holding that message for years, waiting for someone to read it. I don't remember deciding to run. I only remember running. We burst out of that barn like the place was on fire, and crashing through brush, branches whipping our arms. The woods that had felt familiar minutes earlier now felt endless and hostile. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if anything was following. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. My brother stayed right beside me, matching my pace, neither of us saying a word until we hit open ground. When we finally stopped, bent over and gasping, the world felt normal again. The air was just air, the woods were just woods, but the feeling clung to us like static. We walked home in silence. Even outside, in daylight, with houses in sight, I couldn't shake the image of those painted words. We never told the story lightly after that. It wasn't just a tale from before I was born anymore. It was something I had brushed against myself. To this day, I can't explain what we felt in those woods, or why that barn was there, or who painted that message. Maybe it was just an old marker, a cruel piece of local history preserved in a hidden corner. Maybe the feeling was suggestion, my mind filling in gaps once I recognized the name. But I know what my body felt before I read those words. I know my brother felt it too. And I know the silence that followed us home was the same silence I'd heard in the adults' voices every time they told Ronnie's story. Some places remember what happened in them. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there are moments when the past doesn't feel past at all. It feels present, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to rise if you walk in the wrong place at the wrong time. And sometimes, when I think about that barn hidden in the woods, I wonder how many other stories are still sitting out there, painted into old walls, waiting for someone to stumble across them and feel the air turn heavy. One thing that still sits in the back of my mind years later is something my girlfriend told me that I've never been able to explain in a way that feels satisfying. It didn't happen to me directly, which almost makes it worse because I can't measure it against my own senses. All I have is her voice, her fear, and the memory of waking up to messages that made my stomach drop before I was even fully awake. We were in a long-distance relationship at the time. The distance itself wasn't unusual to us anymore. We had settled into a routine shaped by time zones. When I was getting ready for bed, she was usually in the middle of her day. We spent a lot of time on Skype, just existing together while doing our own things. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. It was enough just knowing the other person was there. A small, glowing window connecting two separate rooms in two separate parts of the world. Because of that time difference, I got into the habit of leaving Skype on when I fell asleep. It felt comforting. I'd propped my laptop up on my desk so she could see part of my room, and she'd keep me open on her screen while she worked or watched videos or did whatever she needed to do. There was something calming about drifting off while hearing the faint sounds of her life on the other side. It made the distance feel thinner. My room at the time was small and cluttered in a familiar, lived-in way. My desk sat in the corner, my chair old and creaky, the kind that complained loudly whenever I leaned back too fast. The floor had a few loose boards that clicked if you stepped on them wrong. It wasn't a silent space. Every movement had a sound attached to it. I knew those sounds so well that even half asleep I could usually tell what had shifted or settled. That night felt completely normal. We talked for a bit, nothing serious. just the usual end-of-day conversation. I remember feeling relaxed, the good kind of tired where your thoughts slow down and everything feels distant and soft. I told her I was going to sleep, and she teased me about how early it was for her. I left the call running like I always did, rolled over, and let sleep take me. I didn't dream anything unusual, at least nothing I can remember. The night passed in a blank stretch, the kind of deep sleep that leaves no footprints behind. When I woke up, sunlight was already pushing through my curtains. My first feeling was the dull confusion of morning, or that brief moment where you don't know what day it is or what you're supposed to be doing. Then I reached for my phone. The screen was full of messages from her, not one or two, a flood. My stomach tightened before I even read them. The timestamps stretched across hours of the night. The first message was cautious, asking if I was awake. The next one sounded nervous. After that, the tone shifted sharply into panic. She was asking who was in my room. I sat up in bed, suddenly fully awake. The quiet of my room pressed in on me. Nothing looked disturbed. My chair was where I left it. My door was closed. The air had that stale, untouched feeling of a room that hadn't been entered all night. I scrolled through her messages with shaking hands. She said she could hear my mouse clicking rapidly, over and over, like someone was using my computer. She heard my chair creaking, the exact groan it made when someone leaned forward and back. She described footsteps, soft but definite, the sound of weight shifting across the floorboards. She kept asking me to answer. She told me to turn on the lights. She said my name again and again in text, each message more frantic than the last. At one point she wrote that she could hear breathing that didn't match the slow rhythm of someone asleep. I looked at my laptop. The Skype call had ended hours ago. The screen was dark. The room was silent except for the faint hum of electronics. I swung my legs out of bed and checked the door. It was still locked from the inside. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Audio glitches happen. Old microphones pick up static and turn it into strange sounds. Connections warp noise in unpredictable ways. I told myself all of that, while a cold unease crept up my spine. The details she gave were too specific. She didn't just say she heard noise, she named the exact objects making those noises. I called her immediately. She answered so fast, it was like she'd been holding the phone the entire time. Her voice was tight, exhausted. She sounded like she hadn't slept. Before I could say anything, she asked if I was okay. I told her yes, I'd just woken up, and my room was empty. There was a long silence on the line, the kind filled with breathing and unspoken thoughts. Then she started describing what she'd heard. At first, she thought I had woken up in the middle of the night and gone to my desk. She heard the clicking start, fast and erratic, like someone nervously tapping the mouse. The chair creaked in short bursts, and the way it did when I shifted my weight. She called my name through Skype, expecting me to answer. I didn't. The sounds didn't stop. She said it felt wrong immediately. The rhythm of the movement wasn't natural. It was too repetitive, too focused. Click, 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 pause, creak, click, click. Like someone searching for something in the dark without knowing where it was. She turned up her volume, straining to listen, trying to convince herself it was just me sleepwalking or half awake. Then she heard footsteps. Not loud, not stomping. Careful, slow, crossing the floor behind where my laptop sat. She said the microphone picked it up clearly, each board giving a small complaint under pressure. She told me she started talking louder, telling me to wake up, asking what I was doing. Her messages from that moment were the ones that spiraled into panic. She swore she heard breathing close to the microphone that didn't match the steady inhale and exhale of someone asleep across the room. It was uneven, curious, too close. While she told me this, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my desk. Every sound she described lived in my memory. I could hear them in my head perfectly, and I knew, with a certainty that made my chest tight, that none of it would have been quiet enough for me to sleep through. I'm a light sleeper, always have been. The smallest disturbance usually pulls me up from sleep. A door closing down the hall, a dropped object, even a change in light sometimes. If someone had been in my room moving around, I would have woken instantly. Hey, there was no version of that night where a real person could have walked around clicking my mouse and creaking my chair without dragging me into consciousness. I told her that. I tried to sound calm, reassuring. I said it had to be a glitch, interference, something explainable. But the more I talked, the less convinced I felt. She wasn't someone who scared easily. She didn't jump to supernatural conclusions. Hearing that fear in her voice unsettled me more than the story itself. She admitted that at one point she muted her speakers because the sounds were making her feel sick. She sat there staring at my dark room on her screen, watching for movement that never came. When the noises finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than before. She left the call running for a while longer, hoping I'd wake up and explain everything. When I didn't, she ended it and stayed awake, shaken and unable to settle. After that conversation, she asked me not to leave Skype on while I slept anymore. She tried to laugh it off, but the request came from a place of real fear. I agreed without arguing. Part of me didn't want to risk hearing that story repeated. It was easier to close that door and pretend it was a one-time technical hiccup, but the memory stuck. In the days that followed, I tested everything in my room. I clicked the mouse in different patterns. I rocked in my chair. I walked across the floorboards at different speeds. I recorded the sounds and listened back. They matched her descriptions too well. Each creak and click lined up with what she'd heard through the call. I checked my door and windows obsessively. No signs of entry, no missing items, nothing out of place. As my laptop logs didn't show activity at the time she said the clicking happened. It was as if the entire event existed only in that narrow tunnel between her ears and my microphone. We talked about it less and less as time passed. Life layered new experiences over the memory, but it never disappeared. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit at my desk and look at the empty chair beside me and imagine hearing those rapid clicks in the dark. The thought made my skin prickle every time. I still don't have an explanation that feels complete. Maybe it was a freak combination of static and background noise that mimicked something familiar. Maybe her tired brain filled in the gaps and built a story around random sound. Human perception is fragile like that. We're wired to find patterns, even when none exist. But there's a part of me that remembers the look on her face when she talked about it. Not playful, not dramatic, just shaken in a way that felt deeply real. That part of me can't file the memory away as a simple glitch. It sits in a grey space between logic and unease, a small, unresolved corner of my past. Nothing like it ever happened again. My nights returned to their normal quiet. My room stayed stubbornly ordinary. And yet, every once in a while, when the house is still, and my computer hum is the only sound in the dark, I think about those messages waiting for me in the morning light. I remember the way my heart dropped as I read them, and the strange feeling of being told a story about my own room that I couldn't verify. It's not the kind of event that changes your life. It doesn't haunt every step, but it lingers in the background. A reminder that sometimes the line between explanation and mystery is thinner than we like to admit. And even now, years later, I can't leave an open call running while I sleep without thinking of that night and the sounds that came from a room where, as far as I know, no one was there. It was a quiet evening, the kind of night where the world seems to hold its breath. I had been driving home along a fairly rural stretch of highway, the kind where street lights are sparse and the trees pressed close to the sides of the road, there was a calmness to it, the way only open roads in the countryside can offer, and I was alone, just me and my car, slicing through the silence. I'd been thinking about nothing in particular, letting the hum of the engine and the occasional chirp of crickets fill the space. As I rounded a slight bend in the road, something caught my attention. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the trees, a shadow or a cloud low in the sky. But as I drove closer, it became impossible to ignore. Directly ahead, hovering silently over the road, was a massive black rectangular shape. It didn't make a sound. There were no blinking lights, no engines, no navigation markers. It just floated there, motionless, pitch black against the dim twilight sky. The air around it didn't shift. There was no turbulence, no shadows of trees bending in its presence. It was as if it existed in its own pocket of space, entirely separate from the world I knew. My car slowed, almost instinctively. I couldn't think. The rational part of me wanted to turn around, to drive away as fast as possible, but another part, the part that can't help but stare in disbelief, kept me moving forward. I got closer, and my heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I estimated it was hovering about 75 meters above the road, a distance that felt both enormous and terrifyingly close at the same time. I could make out the edges, the sharp rectangular form, but no other details. No lights, no texture, just an endless dark void that seemed to absorb all the faint light around it. And then I did something I still can't explain. I stopped the car, completely, right there, in the middle of the road. My body was moving on instinct, or maybe curiosity, because I couldn't tear my eyes away. My hands gripped the steering wheel for a second. Then I opened the door and stepped out. The cold air hit me, and the smell of wet asphalt and forest mingled in my nose. I stood there frozen, like a deer caught in headlights, my eyes glued to the object above me. Every logical thought was gone, replaced by a mix of awe and pure, unfiltered terror. For what felt like an eternity, though was likely only 8 seconds, it remained perfectly still. I couldn't hear anything, not even the wind that had been rustling through the trees moments before. My skin tingled in a way I've never felt before, a deep, buzzing awareness that this wasn't just unusual, this was completely outside of reality. My legs wanted to run, my mind screamed to escape, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring upward, trying to process something I had no frame of reference for. Then, almost imperceptibly, it began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it rose in altitude, the black rectangle gliding upward as though it were weightless, completely unaffected by gravity. I could barely comprehend it. My eyes followed its movement as it began drifting back in the direction I had come from, slowly receding into the distance. No sound, no lights, no turbulence, just smooth, eerie motion. And then, up within what felt like a heartbeat and a lifetime all at once, it was gone. Just empty sky, the dark silhouette swallowed by the fading twilight. I didn't get back in my car immediately. I stood there, breathless, shaken to my core, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Rational explanations formed in my mind, only to crumble under the weight of the reality I had witnessed. It couldn't have been a helicopter or a drone or anything conventional. It defied every rule I thought I knew about physics and reality. That night, and the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The memory haunted me, replaying in my mind with a clarity that made sleep difficult. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the pitch-black rectangle hovering silently, and the feeling of being completely powerless, completely outmatched. It washed over me all over again. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly incomprehensible. The encounter changed the way I looked at the world. I became hyper-aware of the skies, hyper-aware of what might be just beyond perception. The universe suddenly felt much larger, much stranger, and much less under my control. I questioned everything I had believed about reality, about technology, about what humans could and couldn't do. That single sighting, 8 seconds of silent hovering above a rural highway, left a permanent mark. I've told a few people about it, cautiously, leaving out certain details because I knew how unbelievable it sounded. The words never do it justice anyway. Seeing something so completely outside the realm of normal experience is something that can't be fully communicated. It has to be witnessed. And even then, the memory lingers differently, imprinting itself not just in your mind, but in your body. My hands still tingle when I think about it, my stomach still twists, and my chest tightens. It wasn't just a sighting, it was a confrontation with the unknown, something that altered the way I experience life forever. Even now, when I drive that same stretch of road, I can't help but glance at the sky a little longer, a little more carefully, as if expecting it to return. My perception of what's possible, of what's real, has shifted. I don't feel the same safety I used to feel alone on a quiet highway, and for reasons I can't explain, I don't want to. That night changed me, made me more cautious, more aware, and strangely, more alive. It was only 8 seconds, but it's a lifetime of wonder and fear condensed into a single memory. The black rectangle floated silently, defying explanation, and in doing so, it taught me something about the world I will never forget. Reality is far stranger than we imagine, and sometimes it arrives in the middle of a lonely road, hovering silently, just waiting for you to notice. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, I want to hear from you. Which story from this episode stayed with you the most? The hotel boy, the phone call from nowhere, the black rectangle, or something else? And have you ever had a dream, a warning, or a glitch moment like these? Tell me in the comments. I read a lot of them, and I might use your story in a future video. If you want a part 2 with more true stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who loves or hates talking about the paranormal.